The man who handed me the keys looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Whatever happens after midnight, don't answer radio channel 13. I laughed because I thought he was joking. 3 nights later, I wished I had listened. People always assume being a forest ranger is peaceful. They picture endless pine trees, fresh mountain air, and quiet mornings watching deer wander through the fog. They imagine solitude as something relaxing. The truth is, solitude changes once the sun goes down, especially when you're the only person for nearly 40 miles. My name isn't important. The Forest Service asked me not to talk publicly about what happened in Black Hollow National Forest, and although I've already resigned, I still have no interest in drawing attention to myself. All I'll say is that I was 28 years old when I accepted the assignment. It was supposed to be temporary. 3 months, easy money, remote location, minimal visitors. The job posting described it as one of the quietest ranger stations in northern Montana. That should have been my first warning. I'd worked in state parks before, campgrounds, nature reserves, popular hiking trails. Even during the off-season, there were always people around. Families, hunters, backpackers, someone. Black Hollow was different. The nearest town sat nearly an hour away, connected only by a winding mountain road that locals refused to drive after dark. When I asked why during orientation, the supervisor simply smiled. "They're superstitious." That was all he said. No explanation, no story, just a smile. The drive into Black Hollow felt longer than any road I'd ever taken. Towering pine trees swallowed the highway on both sides, their branches forming a tunnel that blocked most of the afternoon sunlight. The deeper I drove, the quieter everything became. No radio stations, no passing cars, no houses. Even my phone lost service nearly 30 minutes before I reached the ranger station. According to the GPS, I was still on the correct road. It just didn't feel like I belonged there anymore. The ranger station appeared almost without warning. A weathered wooden building sat beside a gravel parking area, surrounded by dense forest on every side. Behind it stood a small cabin where I'd be living. An observation tower rose above the trees nearby, leaning just enough to make me wonder when it had last been inspected. Everything looked old, not abandoned, just forgotten. The American flag hanging outside barely moved in the still air. There wasn't a single bird singing. That silence bothered me more than I cared to admit. An older man stepped out onto the porch before I even shut off the truck. Late 60s, gray beard, heavy boots, sunburned face. His name was Walter Briggs, the ranger I'd been replacing. He carried a cardboard box filled with personal belongings and walked toward me with a tired smile. "You must be my replacement." I nodded. "Daniel." He shook my hand firmly. "Welcome to Black Hollow." His grip lingered for just a second too long, like he wanted to say something but couldn't decide whether he should. Walter helped unload my supplies before giving me a quick tour. The station itself was small. One office, equipment room, emergency supplies, a weather monitor, several filing cabinets. Nothing unusual. The cabin behind it contained a tiny kitchen, 1 bedroom, a bathroom, and an old stone fireplace. It wasn't luxurious, but it was comfortable enough. Power came from a diesel generator. Water came from an underground well. Internet didn't exist. Cell service didn't exist. The only reliable communication was an aging VHF radio mounted beside the office desk. Walter rested a hand on it. "This thing's older than both of us." He chuckled. Then his smile disappeared. "There are 12 working frequencies." He pointed toward a laminated chart taped beside the radio. "Weather, fire crews, search and rescue, regional dispatch." He traced his finger downward until it stopped just above the last line. Then he folded the chart over with his thumb. "As far as you're concerned, there are only 11. I frowned. "What about the last one?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the office window and looked toward the trees. Finally, without turning around, he said quietly, "Whatever happens, don't answer channel 13. I laughed. "You serious?" Walter didn't. His expression never changed. "No, I mean, He hesitated. "You'll hear things. Static. Voices. Sometimes someone calling your name. They're not real." He looked directly at me. "No matter how real they sound, don't respond." I waited for the punchline. It never came. I figured it was some kind of tradition. Every workplace has them. Fire stations, military bases, hospitals. They all invent stories to scare the new guy. So I smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." Walter didn't smile back. Instead, he reached into his pocket and placed a worn brass key onto the desk. "This opens the observation tower. You'll probably never need it." He stared at the key for a moment. "I hope you never do." Before leaving, he handed me a thick leather logbook. Every ranger writes one. The cover was cracked with age. Its pages stretched back decades. Names, dates, weather reports, wildlife sightings, routine patrol notes. Nothing unusual, until I noticed something. Several pages near the end had been carefully torn out. Not ripped, removed, cleanly, almost professionally. I looked up. What happened here? Walter took the book from my hands for just a second, closed it, then handed it back. "Doesn't matter anymore." By sunset, his truck disappeared down the mountain road. I stood alone outside the cabin, watching the taillights vanish between the trees. Then they were gone, just like that. For the first time all day, I realized how completely alone I was. No traffic, no voices, no distant engines, nothing. Only the wind moving gently through the pines. I carried the last of my boxes inside, locked the cabin door, and started unpacking. The silence settled over everything like heavy snow. Hours passed. The generator hummed steadily outside. Around 10 o'clock, I made coffee, opened the ranger logbook, and began reading entries from previous years. Most were exactly what you'd expect. Routine maintenance, bear sightings, storm damage. Nothing interesting. Then one sentence stopped me cold. It wasn't old. It had been written only 3 months earlier, in shaky handwriting. "If the radio says your name, pretend you didn't hear it." No signature, no explanation, just that single sentence. I stared at it for several seconds before convincing myself Walter had written it as part of the joke. I closed the book, turned off the office lights, and headed toward the cabin. As I reached the front door, a burst of static echoed from inside the empty ranger station. I froze. The radio, one short crackle, then silence again. I told myself it was old equipment, nothing more. I believed that until I heard it a second time. This time, it almost sounded like someone was trying to speak through the static. I didn't sleep much that first night. Maybe it was because I wasn't used to the silence. Or maybe it was because, once I'd heard that burst of static, every tiny sound suddenly felt important. The cabin creaked every few minutes as the night air cooled the old timber. Wind brushed against the roof, making the pine branches scrape softly across the shingles. Somewhere outside, something heavy walked through the underbrush before disappearing again. I kept telling myself it was probably an elk. Or a bear. Anything except what my imagination wanted it to be. Eventually, sometime after 2 in the morning, exhaustion won. When I woke, sunlight poured through the bedroom window. For a few seconds, everything felt normal again. The fear from the night before seemed almost embarrassing. I made coffee, stepped onto the porch, and looked across Black Hollow. Morning transformed the forest into something beautiful. Mist floated between the trees. Birds finally filled the silence. A pair of deer crossed the gravel road without even looking toward the station. It almost convinced me Walter's warning had been nothing more than an old ranger's prank. Almost. The day's schedule was simple. Inspect nearby hiking trails. Check emergency supply caches. Test the weather station. Record wildlife activity. Nothing unusual. Before leaving, I grabbed the leather logbook again. I wanted another look at the strange sentence I'd read the night before. "If the radio says your name, pretend you didn't hear it." I flipped back to the page. The sentence was still there, but now I noticed something else. Directly beneath it, someone had started writing another line. Only 3 words remained before the rest of the page had been scratched over so aggressively the paper had nearly torn. He always. That was it. Just those 2 words. Then hundreds of black pen marks. Almost as if someone desperately wanted nobody to finish reading the sentence. I spent the morning hiking nearly 6 miles through the northern section of the forest. Black Hollow was enormous. The official maps showed dozens of abandoned fire roads that hadn't been maintained for years. Old observation posts stood forgotten among the trees. Collapsed cabins appeared occasionally beside dried creek beds. Everything carried the feeling that people had once lived here, then quietly left. Around noon I reached Lookout Trail number 4. The trail itself remained in decent condition, but something caught my attention near the entrance. Fresh boot prints. Not hiking boots. Heavy work boots. Large. Deep. The ground had been dry for nearly 2 days. Those prints couldn't have been older than yesterday. I crouched beside them. Size 11. Maybe 12. Whoever made them had been carrying something heavy. The heel impressions dug unusually deep into the dirt. I checked the trail register. No visitors had signed in for over 3 weeks. I followed the tracks for nearly half a mile. Then they simply stopped. Not faded. Stopped. As though whoever made them had vanished in the middle of the trail. I searched the surrounding ground. Nothing. No return tracks. No animal prints. No drag marks. Just nothing. After another 15 minutes, I gave up. There had to be a reasonable explanation. By late afternoon, I returned to the station. The office looked exactly as I'd left it. The front door was still locked. Nothing appeared disturbed. I unloaded my gear and started organizing equipment inside the storage room. That's when I noticed something strange. One of the shelves held several old cardboard archive boxes. Most were labeled by year. One box had no label at all. Curious, I opened it. Inside were dozens of faded Polaroid photographs. Most showed routine ranger work. Snowstorms, wildfires, fallen trees, missing trail signs. Then I found one photograph that didn't fit. 3 rangers stood outside the very station where I was now working. All 3 smiled toward the camera. Behind them, inside the office window, someone else stood watching. A tall figure, completely dressed in black. No face, just darkness where the face should have been. At first I assumed it was someone standing inside. Then I realized something. The office window reflected the afternoon sunlight. Nobody inside should have been visible, especially not standing in complete darkness. I flipped the photograph over. Written in faded blue ink were only 2 words. Don't count. I frowned. Don't count what? People? Rooms? Days? It made no sense. I slipped the photograph into my pocket anyway. Something told me I'd want another look later. That evening the clouds rolled in quickly. By 6 o'clock the entire forest had turned gray. Thunder echoed somewhere beyond the mountains. Rain began falling just after sunset. Not heavy, just enough to make the cabin feel smaller, more isolated. The generator continued humming steadily outside. Inside, I heated canned soup and tried reading one of the old trail maintenance manuals. I lasted maybe 15 minutes. My eyes kept drifting toward the office window, toward the radio. At exactly 9:17 p.m., the lights flickered, once, twice, then stabilized. I checked the generator monitor. Everything looked normal, voltage steady, fuel level fine. No warnings. As I turned to leave the office, I noticed something missing. The photograph, the one I'd placed beside the logbook. It was gone. I searched the desk, the drawers, the floor. Nothing. I knew I'd brought it inside. I remembered placing it beside my coffee mug. There was nowhere else it could have gone. Feeling slightly irritated, I searched the cabin next. Still nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd accidentally left it inside the archive box. Maybe I'd only imagined carrying it. Stress could do strange things. By 11, the storm had intensified. Rain hammered against the windows. Tree branches bent violently in the wind. The forest had disappeared into complete darkness. Only the narrow beam from the porch light reached beyond the cabin. Everything outside that circle of light became pitch black. I locked the front door, checked every window, then headed toward bed. Just before midnight, the radio crackled again. Longer this time, not a single burst. Several seconds of static. I stayed perfectly still. Walter's warning echoed inside my head. Whatever happens, don't answer channel 13. The static stopped. Silence returned. Then, a voice, so faint I almost believed I'd imagined it. A man's voice, calm, almost whispering. "Daniel." I didn't move. "Daniel." The voice sounded closer this time. Not louder, closer, as though whoever spoke had leaned toward the microphone. I stared across the dark office. The radio display remained black. No lights, no transmission indicator. It wasn't even turned on. Then, without warning, something knocked 3 times against the cabin's front door. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. I checked the clock. 12:03 a.m. Nobody should have been anywhere near Black Hollow. Yet someone, or something, was standing just outside my door. The knocking didn't come again. Not immediately. I stood frozen in the middle of the cabin, barely breathing, staring at the front door. The clock beside the fireplace read 12:03 a.m. Rain slammed against the windows. The wind howled through the pine trees. Everything else was silent. I told myself it had probably been a loose branch. Maybe something blown against the porch by the storm. That explanation lasted exactly 15 seconds. Then the knocking returned. Knock. Pause. Knock. Another pause. Knock. 3 knocks. Exactly the same rhythm. Exactly the same force. Not frantic. Not aggressive. Patient. Like whoever stood outside already knew I was awake. Every instinct told me to ignore it. I remembered every safety lecture I'd ever received. Never open the door at night. Never approach unknown visitors alone. Always call dispatch first. That last instruction almost made me laugh. Dispatch. There was no phone service. No internet. Only the old radio. The same radio Walter had warned me about. I grabbed the flashlight hanging beside the door. Its beam cut through the darkness inside the cabin. I stepped closer. Slowly, the old wooden floor creaked beneath my boots. The knocking stopped again. I listened. Nothing. Not even footsteps. Only rain. I unlocked the small viewing hatch built into the heavy front door. It was barely 4 inches wide. Just enough to see the porch. I looked outside. Nobody. The porch sat completely empty beneath the yellow light. Rainwater poured off the roof. The rocking chair Walter had left behind moved gently in the wind. There wasn't a single person standing there. I opened the hatch wider. Still nothing. Then something caught my eye. The muddy porch floor. Fresh footprints. Large boot prints. Leading toward the cabin. Not away from it. Whoever had walked onto my porch had never walked back. The prints simply ended directly in front of my door, as if the person standing there had disappeared. A chill ran down my spine. I slammed the hatch shut, locked it, then stepped backward. Every logical explanation I'd been clinging to throughout the day began falling apart. The disappearing boot prints, the photograph, the radio, now this. I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. But the more I repeated it, the less I believed it. The radio crackled again. Longer this time. Static filled the office. Then silence. Then the same voice returned. Calm. Almost conversational. "Daniel." It wasn't shouting anymore. It sounded closer. Almost disappointed that I hadn't answered. My flashlight beam drifted toward the office doorway. The radio still looked completely dead. No lights. No glowing display. No power. And yet, someone was speaking through it. I forced myself to walk into the office. Every step felt heavier than the last. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and old paper. I stopped beside the desk. The radio sat exactly where Walter had left it. I reached toward the power switch. Before my fingers touched it, the voice whispered again. "Don't." Just one word. Then static exploded through the speaker. I jumped backward. The sound lasted barely 2 seconds before disappearing completely. I stared at the radio. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The frequency dial. It wasn't pointing toward any of the normal channels. It rested halfway between 12 and 13, almost as if someone had slowly turned it. I was certain it hadn't been there earlier. I hadn't touched the dial. Neither had anyone else, unless someone had entered the office. I searched every room in the station. Storage room, bathroom, equipment closet, generator shed. Everything remained locked. Nothing had been disturbed. No broken windows. No open doors. No signs of forced entry. Whoever or whatever had moved that dial had done so without ever entering the building. Sleep wasn't happening. I brewed another pot of coffee and sat at the office desk until nearly 2 in the morning. To stay awake, I continued reading through the old Ranger logs. Most entries remained painfully ordinary. Trail maintenance, storm reports, equipment repairs. Then I found an entry dated October 14th, 1997. The handwriting belonged to Ranger Thomas Avery. Second transmission this week. Still hearing voices after midnight. Dispatch confirms nobody is broadcasting. Walter says ignore them. I'm starting to think Walter already knows who they're coming from. The entry ended there. The following page had been ripped out. So had the next, and the next. Nearly 2 weeks of records were missing. I flipped farther ahead. Different handwriting, different ranger, different year. Another sentence caught my attention. The voices never ask everyone. They only call one name. Again, no explanation, no follow-up, just another missing section. It wasn't one ranger imagining things. It wasn't one isolated incident. These entries stretched across decades. Around 3 in the morning, the storm finally weakened. Rain slowed to a drizzle. The wind faded. For the first time in hours, Black Hollow became completely still. Too still. I stepped outside for fresh air. The forest smelled like wet earth and pine needles. Fog drifted between the trees. Everything looked peaceful again, until I noticed the observation tower. The small platform sat nearly 80 feet above the ground. A single figure stood at the top, perfectly motionless, watching the ranger station. I raised my flashlight. The beam barely reached halfway up the tower. The figure never moved. Couldn't make out details, just the outline of someone standing beside the railing. I called out, "Hello!" No answer, only silence. I tried again. "If you're lost, identify yourself." Still nothing. The figure simply remained there, watching. I hurried back inside the station and grabbed the binoculars. When I looked through them, the tower was empty, completely empty. No movement, no person, nothing. I lowered the binoculars, then looked with my own eyes. Still empty. I told myself the fog had created an illusion. That's all it had to be, an illusion. At sunrise, I decided I needed answers. Not guesses, not stories, real answers. There had to be records somewhere, personnel files, incident reports, anything explaining why multiple rangers had written about the same radio, the same voices, the same warnings. As I unlocked the oldest filing cabinet in the office, something slid from the top drawer and landed at my feet. It was the missing Polaroid photograph, the one that had vanished hours earlier. Only now, someone had written a new sentence across the back. The handwriting wasn't faded blue anymore. It looked fresh, as though the ink had barely dried. It read, "He knows you answered." I stared at the words on the back of the photograph for nearly a full minute. "He knows you answered." I kept rereading the sentence, trying to convince myself I was remembering it incorrectly. The night before, the photograph had only said, "Don't count." Now those words were gone, replaced. The handwriting looked almost identical to the faded notes inside the Ranger logbook, but this ink wasn't faded at all. It was dark, glossy, and fresh enough that I instinctively avoided touching it. Someone had written this recently. The problem was, nobody should have been anywhere near Black Hollow except me. I searched the office again, more carefully this time. Every cabinet, every shelf, every storage locker. Nothing appeared missing. Nothing looked disturbed. If someone had entered the building during the night, they had somehow done it without leaving behind even the smallest trace. No muddy footprints, no wet floor, no unlocked windows, nothing. The only evidence that someone else had been inside was that impossible sentence on the back of the photograph. I decided to stop treating Walter's warning like an old man's superstition. If something had happened here before, the answers had to exist somewhere. Government offices documented everything. Missing equipment, injuries, accidents, personnel changes. Someone had to know what had happened at Black Hollow. I just needed to find the right records. The oldest filing cabinet sat against the far wall of the office. Unlike the others, this one required a separate brass key. The same brass key Walter had handed me before leaving. "You'll probably never need it. I hope you never do." At the time, I thought he'd been talking about the observation tower. Now I wasn't so sure. The key turned reluctantly. The cabinet squealed as I pulled open the top drawer. Instead of ordinary ranger reports, the folders were organized by employee names. Every ranger who had ever worked Black Hollow seemed to have their own file. Some folders were thick. Others contained only a few pages. Many had red stamps reading, "Transferred," "Retired," "Deceased." One name immediately caught my attention. Thomas Avery, the ranger whose journal entries I'd read the night before. Inside his personnel file were dozens of routine documents, training certifications, medical evaluations, firearm qualifications, performance reviews. Nothing unusual until the final page. There was no resignation letter, no retirement paperwork, just one typed sentence. Status unknown. Date of disappearance: October 29, 1997. Search suspended after 12 days. No body recovered. No evidence of animal attack. Case closed. I frowned. That couldn't be right. If a federal employee vanished inside a national forest, there should have been pages of investigation reports, interviews, maps, search records. Instead, there was almost nothing. It looked less like an investigation and more like someone had removed the investigation. Another folder caught my eye. Daniel Foster. I blinked. For a second, I genuinely thought someone had somehow placed my own personnel file inside the cabinet. Then I noticed the birth date. 1984. Not me. Different Daniel. Different ranger. His file looked nearly identical to Avery's. Routine paperwork. Good performance. Then, status unknown. Missing. No body recovered. I checked another, and another. 3 different rangers. 3 disappearances. All from Black Hollow. All separated by years. Every investigation reduced to a single page. It wasn't normal. It wasn't even believable. One folder had no name at all. Only a handwritten label. Radio incidents. Inside were loose reports spanning decades. Most were short. Some only one paragraph. The first report dated back to 1972. Multiple personnel reported receiving unauthorized radio transmissions between 0000 and 0400 hours. Dispatch confirms no outgoing communication during reported times. Equipment inspected. No malfunction found. The next report, 1978. Ranger reported hearing his own voice responding over channel 13. Subject displayed signs of acute psychological distress. Transferred within 48 hours. 1985. Night patrol abandoned after repeated unidentified transmissions. Recommendation: discontinue use of frequency 13. 1997. Thomas Avery. Subject insists another station is broadcasting from inside Black Hollow. No transmitting equipment located. Continue observation. That report stopped halfway through the page. The bottom had been cut away with scissors. Not torn. Cut. By lunchtime, I had read nearly 40 years of reports. Every one of them mentioned the same things. Voices. Static. Names. Channel 13. Missing personnel. Yet nowhere, not once, did anyone actually explain what Channel 13 was. It wasn't listed on any official communication chart. It didn't appear in equipment manuals. Technically, didn't exist. Around 1 o'clock, I decided I needed to inspect the radio itself, not the speaker, the wiring. If someone had hidden another transmitter nearby, maybe I could trace the cables. The unit came apart surprisingly easily. Dust covered every internal component. Most parts still carried manufacturing dates from the late 1980s. Nothing looked modified. Nothing looked damaged. Then I noticed one wire. Unlike every other cable, this one disappeared directly into the wall behind the desk. It wasn't part of the official wiring diagram. Someone had added it later. Curious, I followed the cable. It vanished behind old wooden paneling. Removing the first board revealed nothing. The second, nothing. The third, my screwdriver suddenly struck metal. Not a pipe, a steel box hidden inside the wall. The box had no lock, only a single rusted latch. When I opened it, I expected electrical equipment. Instead, I found another notebook, smaller than the Ranger logbook. Black leather, no title, no name, just one sentence written across the front cover. Do not let him finish speaking. Every page inside belonged to Walter Briggs. Not official reports, personal notes, private observations. The first entry began 23 years earlier. The voices don't belong to dead people. They're copies. I stopped reading. Copies? What did that even mean? I turned another page. It learns your voice first. Another page. Then it learns your memories. Another. By the time it says your name, the sentence ended there. The rest of the page had been violently ripped out. I suddenly realized something that made my stomach tighten. Walter hadn't forgotten this notebook. He'd hidden it, inside the wall, behind the radio, somewhere nobody would accidentally find it, which meant Walter hadn't wanted anyone reading it, especially me. The office suddenly felt much smaller. Every creak in the building sounded louder. I slipped the notebook into my backpack. If Walter knew this much, I needed to find him. Immediately, I grabbed the emergency contact list and searched for his phone number. Nothing. Only an old mailing address in Helena. No cell number. No email. No emergency contact. It was as if he'd disappeared the moment he drove away. At exactly 2:47 p.m., the radio crackled. Not static this time. Perfectly clear voice. Calm. Professional. Exactly like a dispatcher. Black Hollow Ranger Station. This is Fire Watch 7. Please confirm your status. Relieved, I reached for the microphone. Finally, a real transmission. Before I could answer, Walter's notebook slipped from my backpack and fell open across the desk. The page it opened to contained only one line, written in enormous letters. If they sound normal, don't answer. I froze. My hand stopped inches from the radio microphone. The dispatcher's voice waited patiently through the speaker. Black Hollow Ranger Station. Please confirm your status. It sounded completely normal, professional, calm. Exactly the way every Forest Service dispatcher I'd ever spoken with sounded. If Walter's notebook hadn't fallen open at that exact second, I would have answered without thinking. Instead, I slowly pulled my hand away from the microphone. The room became painfully quiet. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the dispatcher tried again. Daniel. Every muscle in my body locked. I had never identified myself. Not once. Not over the radio. Not to dispatch. Not to anyone. Yet the voice knew my name. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I stared at the microphone, waiting for another transmission. Nothing. Only soft static. Then, a woman's voice replaced the dispatcher. Daniel. This voice was different. Gentler. Almost comforting. It sounded strangely familiar. So familiar that it took me several seconds to realize why. It sounded exactly like my mother. My mother had been dead for almost 8 years. Cancer. Stage 4. She never even knew I'd become a ranger. Yet somehow, her voice came through that radio with perfect clarity. Daniel, you don't have to be afraid. Couldn't breathe. No recording could sound that real. It wasn't just her voice. It was the way she pronounced my name. The tiny pause before the second syllable. The softness. Every detail. Exactly the way I remembered. The logical part of my brain fought desperately to stay in control. Someone had to be playing a trick. Someone had recordings. Someone knew my personal history. But another part of me, the emotional part, wanted to answer. Just once. Just to hear her speak again. My fingers twitched toward the microphone. Then I remembered Walter's warning. Don't let him finish speaking. Not them. Him. Who was him? The voice continued. I know you're reading Walter's notebook. My heart nearly stopped. Nobody should have known that. The notebook had been hidden inside the wall. I'd found it less than 5 minutes earlier. Nobody had seen me. Nobody. Unless someone was watching the station. I rushed to the office windows. Nothing. Only endless pine trees stretching across the mountains. Rainwater still dripped from the roof after last night's storm. No vehicles. No hikers. No people. The forest looked completely empty. Too empty. I grabbed the binoculars again and scanned the tree line. Every shadow suddenly looked like a person. Every fallen log resembled someone lying on the ground. Every dark opening between the trees felt like a pair of eyes staring back. Then, movement. Roughly 300 yards north of the station. Something disappeared behind a cluster of pines. I focused the binoculars. Nothing. Just trees. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe. The radio crackled again. This time it wasn't my mother's voice. It was Walter. Clear. Calm. Exactly as I'd heard him yesterday. Daniel, don't look at the trees. I lowered the binoculars immediately, then realized something. Walter couldn't possibly be calling. He had no radio. He'd left yesterday morning. Unless he'd returned. Before I could think, another voice interrupted. Also Walter, but different. One sounded frightened. The other sounded completely relaxed. The second Walter laughed softly. You already answered. Silence. The frightened Walter immediately shouted. No, you didn't. The transmission exploded into static. I stepped away from the desk. Every instinct screamed that something was horribly wrong. The voices weren't simply talking to me anymore. They were talking to each other. I opened Walter's notebook again. This time I read every page carefully. Most entries weren't reports. They were observations, almost like someone documenting the behavior of an intelligent animal. One page read, "It never forces anyone. It only waits." Another, "It becomes stronger every time someone answers." Another, "Most people don't realize they've answered." That sentence caught my attention. Didn't realize? How could someone answer without knowing? Then I remembered the dispatcher's first transmission. Please confirm your status. I had never spoken into the microphone, but I had whispered something. When I'd first heard the dispatcher, I'd quietly said to myself, "What?" Barely above a whisper. Could the microphone have picked it up? I checked. The radio microphone remained switched on. Even without transmitting manually, this microphone stayed live. A sick feeling settled inside my chest. Maybe I'd already spoken. Around 4 in the afternoon, I decided I couldn't stay inside the station anymore. If someone really was watching me, sitting behind a desk wasn't helping. I loaded my sidearm, grabbed the binoculars, Walter's notebook, my flashlight, and the brass key to the observation tower. If there was any place offering a better view of the forest, it would be up there. The tower stood nearly 80 feet above the surrounding trees. Its wooden staircase groaned beneath every step. Several boards looked decades overdue for replacement. Halfway up, I paused. The station below suddenly looked tiny. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction. No roads, no buildings, nothing but trees. Thousands upon thousands of them. Felt less like standing above a forest, and more like standing above an ocean. When I finally reached the top platform, I immediately understood why Walter had said he hoped I'd never need the key. Someone had been living there. Recently, there was a sleeping bag tucked beneath one corner. Empty food cans, battery packs, blankets, a small camping stove. Someone had spent weeks, maybe months, watching Black Hollow from that tower. Then I found the notebook, different from Walter's, different handwriting. Only 3 pages remained. Everything else had been removed. The final entry read, "He doesn't stay in the forest. The forest is only where he learns your voice. Once he knows enough, he follows you home." A loud metallic bang echoed somewhere beneath the tower. I looked down. My truck. The driver's door slowly swung shut. I knew for a fact I'd locked it before climbing the tower. Nobody stood near it. Nobody walked away. Yet someone had just been inside my truck. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest, the emergency radio on my belt suddenly came to life. Not with static, not with a voice, with the unmistakable sound of someone breathing. Slow, steady, and far too close to the microphone. The breathing lasted exactly 7 seconds. Slow, controlled, deliberate. Then it stopped. Not with static, not with interference. Simply stopped, as if whoever had been standing over the microphone had stepped away. I looked at the emergency radio clipped to my vest. The signal indicator wasn't flashing. There was no incoming transmission. According to the display, nothing had happened, yet I'd heard it. Every breath, every pause, every second. My heartbeat pounded louder than the wind. I spun in a slow circle across the observation platform, scanning the forest through the binoculars. Miles of pine trees stretched toward the horizon. Nothing moved. No hikers, no wildlife, no vehicles, just endless green. And somewhere beneath that canopy, someone had just breathed directly into my radio. I climbed down from the tower much faster than I'd climbed up. The old wooden stairs groaned beneath my boots. Several times I nearly lost my footing. By the time I reached the ground, sweat soaked through the back of my uniform despite the cool mountain air. The truck still sat exactly where I'd parked it. Driver's door closed. Everything looked normal. Too normal. I unlocked the truck carefully. Nothing inside appeared missing. Maps, first aid kit, emergency food. Everything remained where I'd left it. Then I noticed something resting on the passenger seat. Cassette tape, black, unlabeled, old enough that dust coated most of its surface. I stared at it for several seconds. I had never owned a cassette player. Neither had the truck. Someone had placed it there while I stood 80 feet above the ground. My first thought was simple. Leave. Get in the truck. Drive back to town. Forget the job. Forget Black Hollow. Forget every strange thing I'd seen. Then I remembered the road. No phone service. Nearly an hour to civilization. If someone really was hiding somewhere inside this forest, leaving blindly after dark might be the worst decision I could make. I needed answers first. Back inside the ranger station, I locked every door. Twice. The cassette tape sat on the desk while I searched the storage room. Eventually, I found an old tape recorder buried beneath broken weather equipment. The batteries were dead. Fortunately, several unopened packs still sat inside emergency storage. After replacing them, the recorder whirred to life with a weak mechanical hum. I hesitated, then pressed play. Static. Nearly 30 seconds of it. Then, Walter's voice. Not yesterday's Walter. A younger Walter. Maybe 20 years younger. He sounded exhausted. If anyone finds this. Long pause. Don't trust the radio. More static. The voices aren't recordings. They're rehearsals. I frowned. Rehearsals? What did that even mean? Walter continued. It listens first. Days. Sometimes weeks. It learns your memories. Your fears. Your voice. Another pause. Then his breathing grew heavier. If it ever sounds exactly like someone you love, run. The tape clicked. Silence. End of recording. I rewound it. Played it again. Same message. Nothing more. No explanation. No names. No dates. Just another warning. Every answer I found only created 2 new questions. The afternoon disappeared while I compared Walter's notebook, the ranger logbook, and the personnel files. Eventually, one pattern became impossible to ignore. Every missing ranger had remained at Black Hollow for roughly the same amount of time. 21 days. Not 20. Not 22. Exactly 21. Thomas Avery, 21. Daniel Foster, 21. Another ranger named Richard Hale, 21. Walter, 23 years. The only survivor. How? Why had Walter lived while everyone else disappeared? The answer seemed obvious. He had learned the rules. Rules nobody bothered writing officially. Instead, they hid them. Inside notebooks, inside walls, inside old recordings. Almost like every ranger quietly trained the next one without telling the government. Around 6 that evening, clouds rolled over the mountains again. Another storm. This one looked worse. The forest darkened long before sunset. Thunder rolled somewhere far away. I stepped onto the porch to secure loose equipment before the rain arrived. That's when I saw it. Someone stood at the edge of the tree line, perfectly still, too far away to recognize. Roughly 200 yards. The figure wore dark clothing. No movement, no flashlight, just watching. I raised my binoculars. The figure remained exactly where I'd seen it. Unlike the tower incident, it didn't disappear. This time I could see details. Tall, male, heavy jacket, hands hanging at his sides. His face remained hidden beneath the shadows of the trees. I lowered the binoculars. Still there. Raised them again. Still there. Whoever this was, they were real. I called out. Forest Service. If you can hear me, identify yourself. No response. The figure never moved. I tried again. Nothing. Not even a reaction. Eventually, the rain began falling between us. Within seconds, the curtain of water swallowed the tree line. When visibility returned, the figure was gone. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. Instead, I sat inside the office with Walter's notebook spread across the desk. Around midnight, the radio turned itself on. Not with static, not with voices, just one soft mechanical click. The display illuminated for the first time since I'd arrived. One number glowed green, 13. Nothing else. No frequency, no signal strength. Only, without touching anything, the speaker activated. No breathing, no whisper, no dispatch. Instead, a man calmly began reading my personnel file. My name is Daniel. He spoke my full name, my birthday, my hometown, my academy graduation date, my father's name, the date my mother died. Things I'd never told anyone at Black Hollow. Things that weren't inside the ranger station. The voice knew everything. Every word felt colder than the last. Then, it stopped. For nearly 5 seconds, the station became completely silent. Finally, the voice asked one simple question. Are you ready to come home? Before I could react, every light inside the ranger station went out at once. The generator hadn't failed. Someone, or something, had switched it off. Darkness swallowed the ranger station so completely that, for a moment, I forgot where I was. The only sound left was the rain hammering against the roof. Not even the generator made a noise anymore. That terrified me more than the voice had. The generator wasn't connected to the station electrically. It sat nearly 40 feet behind the building inside its own steel enclosure. Someone or something had physically shut it off. I grabbed my flashlight. Nothing. It wouldn't turn on. I slapped it against my palm. Still dead. The batteries had been brand new that morning. A faint orange glow appeared outside the office window. At first I thought lightning had illuminated the forest. Then I realized it wasn't moving. It wasn't flashing. It was steady. Someone was standing outside holding an old kerosene lantern. The light barely revealed the outline of the figure. Tall, broad shoulders, long coat, exactly the same silhouette I'd seen standing at the edge of the trees earlier that evening. Only now, it stood less than 20 feet from the station. I instinctively reached for my sidearm. The holster was empty. For one horrifying second, I thought someone had taken it. Then I remembered. I'd placed it on the office desk while reading Walter's notebook. My eyes darted across the room. The pistol was still there, exactly where I'd left it. I grabbed it chambered around, and aimed toward the window. The lantern remained perfectly still. The figure never moved, never blinked, never reacted, almost like it wasn't waiting for me to shoot. It was waiting for me to do something else. Then the lantern slowly lowered. The figure turned and began walking toward the forest. Not running, not hiding, just walking. After a few seconds, it disappeared behind the trees. The orange glow faded until only darkness remained. I should have stayed inside. Every survival instinct told me that. Lock the doors. Wait until daylight. Report everything. Except there was no way to report anything. No radio, no phone, no power. And if someone really had shut down the generator, they couldn't have gotten far. I grabbed another flashlight from the emergency locker. This one worked. Barely. His beam flickered, but it was enough. I pulled on my rain jacket and stepped outside. The air smelled different. Not like wet pine anymore. There was another odor now. Old smoke. The kind that lingers after a campfire has burned for days. I followed the muddy footprints leading away from the station. They were fresh, deep, exactly like the ones I'd found on Lookout Trail. This time, they didn't disappear. They continued straight into the forest. The rain muffled everything. My own footsteps sounded strangely distant. Branches dripped steadily overhead. The flashlight beam caught thousands of tiny raindrops floating through the darkness. Every few seconds, I'd stop and listen. Nothing. No birds. No insects. No animals. It was the same unnatural silence I'd noticed my first afternoon. Except now, it felt intentional. After nearly 15 minutes, I reached an old fire road that no longer appeared on my official map. Grass had grown through cracked asphalt. Trees leaned inward from both sides, slowly reclaiming the road. The footprints continued along it. Someone used this path regularly. Then I found something impossible to ignore. A rusted Forest Service warning sign lay face down beside the road. I flipped it over. The faded lettering barely remained visible. Black Hollow Research Area. Authorized personnel only. Research area? Nobody had ever mentioned a research facility. Not Walter. Not headquarters. Not the orientation office. Nothing. The road eventually ended at what looked like a collapsed maintenance building. Concrete walls. Broken windows. Roof partially caved in. Nature had almost completely reclaimed it. Vines climbed over the entrance. Small trees grew through cracks in the foundation. From the outside, it looked abandoned for decades. The footprints disappeared inside. I hesitated. Every horror movie I'd ever seen began exactly like this. The smart decision was obvious. Leave. Return tomorrow. Bring backup. Except backup didn't exist. I was Black Hollow's only ranger. If someone lived inside this building, I needed to know. The flashlight illuminated layers of dust as I stepped through the broken doorway. Old filing cabinets lined one wall. Most had rusted shut. Broken laboratory tables stood overturned across the room. Electrical wires hung from the ceiling like vines. The place definitely wasn't a ranger station. It looked scientific. Near the back wall, I discovered another steel door. Unlike everything else in the building, this one looked newer. The handle showed almost no rust. Someone maintained it. The door opened surprisingly easily. Cold air rushed upward from below. Concrete stairs disappeared into darkness. Underground, the temperature dropped noticeably as I descended. The flashlight beam bounced off damp concrete walls. Water dripped steadily somewhere below. The stairs continued much farther than I expected. 20 feet, 30, 40. By the time I reached the bottom, I estimated I stood nearly 60 feet beneath the forest floor. The underground hallway stretched in two directions. Every wall had once been painted white. Now everything carried dark stains from years of moisture. One room still contained furniture, metal desks, computers from another era, stacks of ruined documents. Most had rotted beyond recognition, but one bulletin board remained surprisingly intact. Dozens of photographs covered it. Forest maps, radio diagrams, topographic surveys, and in the center, One photograph had been circled repeatedly in red marker. It showed the Black Hollow Ranger Station, exactly as it looked today, except there was no office beside it, no observation tower, only the cabin. The photograph had been dated 1989, 20 years before the current station supposedly existed. Something wasn't right. As I studied the board, another sound echoed through the hallway. Not footsteps, not breathing. A telephone, an old rotary phone, began ringing somewhere deeper underground. Once, twice, 3 times. Continued ringing steadily. No electricity should have existed down here. The entire facility had been abandoned for decades. Yet the phone kept ringing. And then, a man's voice echoed from somewhere in the darkness. Calm, patient, as though he'd been expecting me. "Daniel, you finally found us." The voice echoed through the underground hallway. Not through speakers, not through a radio. Came from somewhere ahead. Calm, clear, almost welcoming. "Daniel, you finally found us." The rotary phone stopped ringing. Silence settled over the facility again. I tightened my grip on the pistol and pointed the flashlight down the corridor. Nothing, just damp concrete stretching into darkness. The beam reached maybe 30 feet before disappearing into black. Whoever had spoken stood beyond it. I swallowed hard. "Forest Service." I called out as confidently as I could. "If someone's down here, identify yourself." No response. Only the sound of water dripping somewhere deeper underground. Then, a metallic door slowly creaked shut. Not slammed. Closed. Softly. Like someone had quietly stepped into another room. Every sensible part of me wanted to turn around. Leave. Seal the entrance. Call federal authorities the moment I reached civilization. Instead, I walked forward. Not because I was brave. Because I knew that if I left without answers, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what had been hiding beneath Black Hollow. The hallway split into 3 separate corridors. Someone had once painted labels above each one. Most of the letters had peeled away. Only fragments remained. Stay. The third hallway interested me immediately. Its heavy steel door still carried a faded warning sign. Authorized personnel only. Unlike the rest of the underground facility, this corridor looked cleaner. Dust covered the floor, but not much. Someone had walked here recently. Fresh footprints. The same heavy work boots. Exactly the same size I'd been following since my first patrol. The prints headed straight through the security door. I crouched beside them. Still wet. Impossible. It hadn't rained underground. Someone had entered only minutes earlier. Maybe seconds. I pushed the steel door open. The room beyond surprised me. It wasn't another laboratory. It was a communications center. Old radio consoles covered 3 walls. Some looked military. Others belonged to the Forest Service. Massive reel-to-reel recording machines filled one corner. Most equipment had long since died. Except one machine still glowed. A tiny green light blinked steadily in the darkness. I approached cautiously. The equipment couldn't possibly have electricity. The generator above ground had been shut off. Yet this machine continued running. A cassette slowly turned inside it. The tape hissed softly. Someone had left it recording. For years, maybe decades. Beside the recorder sat dozens of labeled tapes. 1979, 1980, 1981, 1982. Every single year had its own collection. Hundreds of recordings. One cassette lay separate from the others. Its labels simply read, "Daniel." My blood ran cold. I picked it up carefully. The plastic looked new, not 30 years old. Fresh, as though someone had labeled it recently. Very recently. How? I'd only arrived 4 days ago. Nobody should have known I'd be assigned here until last week. Who had prepared a cassette with my name? And why? The recorder suddenly clicked. The spinning reel stopped. Without touching anything, playback began automatically. Static filled the room. Then, my own voice, perfectly clear. I should have listened. I stared at the machine. Those were the exact words I'd whispered to myself after finding the strange message inside Walter's notebook. Nobody else had been there. Nobody. Yet somehow, the recorder had captured them. The recording continued. My own voice kept speaking. Only, I wasn't saying those words now. I stayed too long. I shouldn't have answered. I shouldn't have come underground. The tape played sentences I'd never spoken, but they sounded exactly like me. Not similar. Exactly. Every pause, every breath, every tiny imperfection. It wasn't an imitation. It was me. Walter's notebook suddenly made horrifying sense. It learns your voice. The voices aren't recordings. They're rehearsals. The machine wasn't replaying conversations. It was practicing, learning, building a perfect copy. A loud bang echoed from somewhere deeper inside the communications center. I spun around. Another steel door stood open. It definitely hadn't been open moments earlier. The flashlight beam revealed another room beyond it. Smaller, almost like an office. One desk, one chair, one bed. Someone had lived there. Recently, canned food-lined metal shelves, fresh bottled water, blankets, medical supplies. Everything looked organized. Nothing appeared abandoned. Whoever lived here had expected to stay for a long time. Then I noticed something hanging on the wall. A Forest Service jacket, still clean. Its name tag read, Thomas Avery, the ranger who disappeared in 1997. Impossible. His file clearly stated he'd vanished 29 years earlier. Nobody leaves a jacket hanging untouched for nearly 3 decades. Not like this. There wasn't even dust on it. Someone maintained this room. Someone came here regularly. The desk contained dozens of handwritten pages. Most were covered in frantic notes. Some were nearly impossible to read. One paragraph stood out. It doesn't copy people. It copies possibilities. Every conversation you almost have. Every answer you almost give. It keeps practicing until one version finally replaces you. I read the paragraph 3 times. Replace you? What did that even mean? Then I heard footsteps. Real footsteps. Heavy boots. Walking slowly toward the room. Not running. Not hiding. Just walking. One step. Pause. Another step. Pause. The hallway amplified every sound. Whoever approached wanted me to hear them coming. I switched off my flashlight immediately. Darkness swallowed the room. The footsteps continued. Closer. Closer. Until they stopped directly outside the office doorway. I held my breath. For nearly 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then, a flashlight beam swept slowly across the hallway. It wasn't searching randomly. It moved with purpose. Like the person holding it already knew exactly where I was hiding. The beam stopped at the office entrance. A silhouette appeared. Tall, broad shoulders, Forest Service uniform. The man stepped into the doorway. I could only see his outline, until lightning flashed somewhere above ground. For one brief second, the room filled with pale white light, and I saw his face. It was mine. For less than a second, I forgot how to breathe. The man standing in the doorway wasn't just similar to me. He was me. Same height, same build, same beard I hadn't bothered shaving since arriving at Black Hollow. Even the small scar above my left eyebrow, the one I'd gotten falling off my bike when I was 12, was there. The flashlight in his hand illuminated only half his face. The other half remained buried in shadow, but I didn't need to see the rest. I knew exactly what my own face looked like. Neither of us moved. The silence stretched between us like a wire ready to snap. My hand tightened around the pistol. His hand didn't hold a weapon, only an old Forest Service flashlight. For several long seconds, we simply stared at each other. Then, he smiled. Not a wide smile, just enough for the corner of his mouth to rise. The exact smile I made whenever I felt nervous but didn't want anyone else to notice. I had seen that expression in mirrors my entire adult life. Seeing someone else wear it made my stomach twist. He spoke first. "You're late." My own voice, perfectly calm. Exactly the way I sounded during conversations. Not distorted, not robotic, not copied poorly. If someone had blindfolded me, I would have believed I was listening to myself. I forced myself to speak. "Who are you?" He tilted his head. The movement was identical to one of my own unconscious habits. When you don't understand something, you always ask questions first. He chuckled softly. "I've noticed." Every instinct screamed at me to pull the trigger, but I couldn't. Not because I was afraid, because some irrational part of my brain kept whispering, "What if that's actually you?" It was ridiculous, impossible. Yet seeing my own face destroyed every certainty I'd had. The figure glanced toward Walter's notebook lying open on the desk. "You've been reading things Walter wasn't supposed to leave behind." I swallowed. "You know Walter?" "I know everyone." He answered so casually it sounded almost meaningless. Then he added, "I knew Thomas. I knew Richard. I knew Daniel." My heart skipped. "Which Daniel?" He smiled again. "The first one." The room suddenly felt colder. There had been another Daniel before me. Not just another ranger. Another Daniel. He'd disappeared 20 years earlier. And now, something wearing my face claimed to have known him. I slowly backed toward the office wall. The figure didn't follow. He simply watched, like a teacher waiting for a student to solve an obvious problem. Finally, I asked the question that had been growing inside my head since I'd found Walter's notebook. "What are you?" For the first time, his smile disappeared. "I don't have a name. I've had many. Every generation gives me a different one." He looked around the underground facility. Researchers called me an anomaly. Soldiers called me a weapon. Rangers called me Channel 13. His eyes met mine. But none of those names belonged to me. I couldn't process what I was hearing. This wasn't the answer of a murderer, or a hermit, or someone suffering from mental illness. He spoke like something ancient, something that had existed here long before any ranger station had ever been built. "You copy people," I said quietly. He nodded once. "Eventually, not immediately. I listen first." The words matched Walter's notebook almost exactly. "It takes time. I learn. Every memory, every habit, every fear, every lie you tell yourself." His expression softened. "Humans are surprisingly predictable. You killed them." The words escaped before I realized I'd spoken them. "Thomas, Richard, every missing ranger." The figure shook his head. "No, they left. They always leave. You simply never see where." I felt anger replacing fear. "That's not an answer. It isn't one you're ready for." Silence settled over the room again. Then, he said something that shattered every remaining piece of confidence I had. "You still think you've only been here 4 days?" I frowned. "What? You've stopped counting." The words hit me like a punch. "The photograph. Don't count." The warning suddenly made terrifying sense. He took one slow step closer. "You arrived 21 days ago." "No," I answered immediately. "I arrived Monday." He shook his head. "You remember Monday. That doesn't mean it was this week." "No," I whispered. "That's impossible." "Is it?" he asked calmly. "When was the last sunrise you actually watched?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Had I? I remembered mornings, coffee, patrols, but specific sunrises? I couldn't remember one. "When did you last speak to another living person?" "Walter, obviously. Except, had that really been 4 days ago? Or longer?" My memories suddenly felt blurry, like pages shuffled out of order. The figure continued. "You've been listening every night. You've answered more times than you remember." "I've almost finished." "No." I backed farther away. "No, I haven't." He didn't argue. Instead, he began speaking, not to me, as me. I was 28 when I accepted the assignment. My own voice, word for word. The exact opening sentence I'd planned to tell investigators once I returned home. He continued. "It was supposed to be temporary. 3 months. Easy money. Remote location. Minimal visitors." He wasn't guessing. He was reciting my thoughts. the story I'd been telling myself since accepting the job. I looked down at Walter's notebook desperately. One final page remained unread, written in large letters. When he starts finishing your sentences, run. Without another thought, I grabbed the notebook, shoved the figure aside, and sprinted into the hallway. He didn't chase me. At least, I didn't hear him. The only sound behind me was my own voice echoing through the underground corridors, calling my name, again, and again, and again. Except, each time it called, it sounded a little less frightened, and a little more like it had already replaced me. I ran. Not because I believed I could outrun whatever was wearing my face. I ran because every instinct left in my body screamed the same thing. Get away from that voice. My boots pounded against the damp concrete floor as I sprinted through the underground corridor. The flashlight beam bounced wildly across stained walls, rusted pipes, and open doorways that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. Behind me, I heard my own footsteps, not echoes, another pair, keeping perfect pace with mine. I refused to look back. Every horror story I'd ever laughed at suddenly made sense. Sometimes you don't look because you're afraid of what you'll see. Sometimes you don't look because a part of you already knows. The footsteps stayed exactly 6 or 7 feet behind me, never gaining, never falling back, always there. The hallway split again. I couldn't remember which direction I'd come from. In my panic, every corridor looked identical. Concrete, steel doors, flickering emergency lights that somehow still worked despite the abandoned facility having no electricity. I chose the left passage. After 30 seconds of running, I stopped. The hallway ended at a dead wall. No door, no stairs, nothing. The footsteps stopped too. Silence. Then, my own voice drifted through the darkness behind me. You always choose left. I slowly turned around. The hallway was empty. Nobody stood there, yet I could still hear breathing. Close, too close, almost as if someone stood directly beside my shoulder. I spun in circles, sweeping the flashlight everywhere. Nothing. No movement. No figure. No shadows. Then the breathing disappeared. A second later, the footsteps resumed. This time, they came from in front of me. I didn't think. I fired. The pistol exploded inside the narrow hallway. The muzzle flash lit everything for a fraction of a second. Concrete, pipes, empty air. The bullet struck the far wall. Chunks of concrete sprayed across the floor. There had never been anyone there. The footsteps stopped immediately. Only the ringing in my ears remained. I forced myself to breathe. One shot left me with 11 rounds. The magazine suddenly felt far too small. Whatever I was dealing with, bullets weren't going to solve it. I retraced my path, moving slower this time. Eventually, I found the communications room again. Or, what should have been the communications room. The door was gone. In its place stood nothing but a blank concrete wall. I checked the notebook. I checked the floor. The hallway numbers. Everything matched. I was in the right place, but the room no longer existed. No! I whispered. I slapped the wall. Solid concrete. No hidden doorway. No outline. Nothing. The entire room had vanished, along with every tape, every document, every piece of evidence. It was as though the underground complex had rearranged itself. Then I noticed writing on the wall. Fresh, dark, almost wet. It hadn't been there moments earlier. It read, "You're learning." My stomach twisted. I backed away immediately. The words weren't painted. They looked scratched directly into the concrete, as though carved by someone's fingernails. The flashlight flickered, once, twice, then died completely. Darkness swallowed everything. For several seconds, I couldn't see my own hands. I reached into my backpack and grabbed the spare flashlight. Turned on immediately. When its beam illuminated the wall again, the message had changed. Now it read, "Turn around." I didn't. Walter's notebook had become the only thing I trusted. I flipped through it with trembling hands until I found another folded page hidden inside the back cover. Unlike the others, this page looked newer. Walter must have added it years after writing the first entries. Across the top he'd written, "If you're reading this, he's almost finished." Below it were 3 numbered rules. 1. Never follow your own voice. 2. Never believe the station is where you left it. 3. Leave before sunrise. Nothing else. No explanation. Just those 3 rules. Leave before sunrise. That meant there was still a way out. Somewhere. I checked my watch. 2:41 a.m. Only a few hours remained before daylight. Assuming my watch still meant anything, I began searching methodically. Every hallway, every door, every stairwell. Eventually I found something I'd somehow missed before. A heavy steel exit door marked Service Access. Unlike every other room, cold night air seeped through the gap beneath it. Outside, I almost laughed with relief. The door opened onto another staircase. Long, steep, the climb felt endless. When I finally pushed open the hatch at the top, fresh rain hit my face. I was outside, back in the forest. Except, I wasn't near the abandoned research building anymore. I stood in the middle of a clearing I'd never seen before. The observation tower was nowhere in sight. Neither was the ranger station. The underground exit had brought me somewhere completely different. I checked my compass. It spun uselessly before settling south. Then north, then west. Couldn't decide. A faint orange light appeared through the trees. The ranger station, or so I hoped. I started walking toward it. 10 minutes later, the light hadn't grown any closer. I kept walking, still the same distance. It was like chasing the moon, always visible, never reachable. Then another light appeared, to my right, then another, and another. Soon dozens of warm yellow lights floated between the trees. Everyone looked exactly like the porch light outside the ranger station. Everyone identical, everyone impossible. I realized with horror, I had no idea which one was real. A familiar voice drifted through the darkness. Not from one direction, from all of them. Daniel, then another. Daniel, then dozens, hundreds. Every version of my own voice I'd heard over the last week called my name at once. Some frightened, some angry, some laughing, some crying. All identical, covered my ears. It didn't help. The voices weren't coming through the air anymore. They echoed inside my head. One voice rose above the others. Calm, patient, the same voice wearing my face underground. You still think you're trying to escape. A long pause. Then, what if you've been trying to get back in? The voices stopped all at once. Not one by one, not gradually. Every single one vanished in the same instant, leaving behind a silence so complete that my ears rang. I stood frozen in the middle of the clearing, surrounded by dozens of identical lights floating between the trees. Every direction looked exactly the same. Every path looked familiar, and for the first time since arriving at Black Hollow, I couldn't remember which direction I'd originally come from. I looked down at my boots. The muddy ground held dozens of footprints. Some were fresh. Some had begun filling with rainwater. At first I thought they belonged to different people. Then I noticed something. Every single footprint matched my boots. The same tread, the same size, the same wear pattern on the outer heel. It looked as though I had walked through that clearing hundreds of times. No, I whispered. That wasn't possible. I'd never seen this place before. Had I? I closed my eyes and tried remembering yesterday. Instead, I remembered another night, standing in the same clearing, holding the same flashlight, looking toward the same lights. The memory felt real, too real, except I knew it had never happened. Didn't I? Walter's notebook suddenly slipped from beneath my arm and landed open in the mud. A page I hadn't noticed before unfolded from inside the back cover. The paper looked newer than the rest, almost white, as if Walter had hidden it deliberately. Across the top, he'd written, "When your memories stop matching each other." Below that, "Trust the oldest ones." The oldest ones. I tried. I forced myself to think about life before Black Hollow. My apartment, my truck, my academy graduation, my mother's funeral. Those memories remained clear. sharp. Then I tried remembering my first day at the station. Walter greeting me, the office, the tour, the warning about Channel 13. For the first time, the memory flickered, like an old videotape. Walter's face blurred for a second, then changed. Instead of standing outside the station, he stood inside the office, then beside the observation tower, then inside the underground facility. 3 different memories, all claiming to be the first day. My head began pounding. Something wasn't simply copying my memories anymore. It was rewriting them, replacing pieces, testing different versions, exactly like Walter had described. Rehearsals. A faint radio transmission crackled somewhere ahead. Not through my handheld, not through the station. Somewhere in the forest itself. Static. Then a familiar voice. Black hollow dispatch to Ranger Daniel. I closed my eyes. I didn't answer. The voice continued. We've located your position. Rescue is 5 minutes away. Sounded perfect. Professional. Exactly the transmission I'd wanted to hear since arriving. But Walter's rules echoed inside my mind. If they sound normal, don't answer. The transmission changed. Now it was my supervisor from headquarters. Then one of my academy instructors. Then my younger brother. Each voice lasted only a few seconds before becoming someone else. Everyone sounded flawless. Everyone asked me to respond. Everyone promised help. I kept walking, without speaking. The lights between the trees slowly began disappearing, one by one, until only a single porch light remained. The real ranger station, or at least, I hoped it was. As I approached, something immediately felt wrong. The building looked older, much older. The paint had almost completely peeled away. Several windows were boarded shut. The observation tower leaned dangerously to one side. It looked abandoned, not after years, after decades. The front door stood open. I stepped inside. Dust covered everything. The office furniture had rotted. Shelves had collapsed. Plants grew through cracks in the wooden floor. It looked nothing like the station I'd left only hours earlier. This place had been empty for years, maybe longer. Then I saw the calendar hanging beside the office window. The year still visible beneath layers of dust. 1997. I stared at it. No, that couldn't be right. I ripped the calendar from the wall. The pages beneath all showed the same year. 1997. The year Thomas Avery disappeared. The same year the underground communication center had last been active. I backed away slowly. The office suddenly felt too quiet. Something reflected my flashlight from behind the reception desk. A badge. Forest Service. Covered in dust. I picked it up carefully. The name engraved across the front read, Thomas Avery. Beneath it lay a human skeleton, still wearing fragments of a ranger uniform. I stumbled backward. The skull faced upward toward the ceiling. Its empty eye sockets stared directly at me. One skeletal hand still clutched an old handheld radio. The battery had long since corroded. Yet, the speaker suddenly crackled. Static. Then, Thomas Avery's voice. Not a recording. A desperate whisper. Run. Before I could move, another voice answered through the dead radio. My own. He already did. Every light inside the abandoned station came on simultaneously. Brilliant white. So bright I had to shield my eyes. When my vision cleared, the skeleton was gone. The badge remained in my hand. Everything else had changed. The station looked new again. Fresh paint, working equipment, clean floors, exactly as it had looked on my first day. Except, I wasn't alone anymore. Standing in the office were 6 forest rangers, all wearing identical uniforms, all staring directly at me. Every one of them had my face. For several seconds, none of us moved. 6 men, all wearing Forest Service uniforms, all carrying the same flashlight, all standing perfectly still. And every one of them had my face. Not close, not similar. My face. The same scar above the eyebrow. The same tired eyes. The same rain-soaked uniform. Felt less like looking at strangers and more like standing in a room full of mirrors, except none of the reflections copied my movements. Then, one by one, they smiled. Not identical smiles. One looked relieved. One looked exhausted. One looked terrified. One looked almost sympathetic. The last one looked completely empty, as though whatever humanity had once existed behind those eyes had long since disappeared. The one standing closest to me spoke first. "You've made it farther than we did." His voice sounded exactly like mine, only older, not physically older, emotionally, the kind of voice belonging to someone who hadn't slept peacefully in years. Another version of me stepped forward. "We all thought we could leave." He pointed toward the office door. "We all reached it." Then he looked directly into my eyes. "None of us crossed it." I shook my head. "No, this isn't real. It doesn't matter." The third one answered. "It only matters if you believe it's real." Walter's notebook suddenly slipped from my hand again. It landed open to the very last page. One sentence, only one, written differently from the rest. The handwriting wasn't Walter's. It looked much older, almost elegant. It read, "Don't fight the copy. Make it believe you're already gone." I stared at those words, then back at the 6 men. Then everything finally made sense. Not perfectly, but enough. Whatever existed beneath Black Hollow didn't kill people immediately. Studied them, copied them, memories, voices, habits. Eventually, it created something convincing enough to replace them. Not because it needed bodies, because it needed identities. It wanted me to believe the copies were real. It wanted me to argue, to defend myself, to prove I was the original. Because the moment I started proving who I was, it would finish becoming me. I slowly lowered my pistol. Every copy watched carefully. One smiled. They thought I'd finally accepted it. Instead, I spoke quietly. "I'm not Daniel." Silence. The nearest copy frowned. "What?" I repeated it. "I'm not Daniel. I'm nobody." For the first time, every face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Confusion. Tiny cracks appeared beneath their perfect expressions. They had expected fear, denial, anger, nothing. Walter's final instruction suddenly made perfect sense. Make it believe you're already gone. If it copied identity, then refusing my own identity left it with nothing to finish. One of the copies stepped closer. "No, you are Daniel." I smiled. "No, I left. I don't remember who stayed." The room became strangely quiet, almost disappointed. The fluorescent lights flickered violently. Every copy froze. Their movements slowed, like a recording losing power. One by one, their faces began changing. Mine, Thomas Avery's, Walter Briggs, strangers I'd never seen. Dozens of different people flickered across the same bodies, like a television rapidly changing channels. Then, the lights exploded. Darkness. When I opened my eyes, morning sunlight poured through the windshield of my truck. I sat behind the steering wheel, engine running. The mountain road stretched ahead. Black Hollow disappeared in the rearview mirror. The ranger station was gone. There was only forest. No buildings. No observation tower. No gravel parking lot. Nothing. I slammed the brakes, jumped out, walked back nearly half a mile. There was no entrance road anymore. No tire tracks. No sign that anything had ever existed there. Only trees. The GPS showed empty national forest, exactly where the station should have been. I drove straight to Helena. The Forest Service office looked exactly as I'd remembered. I walked inside, placed Walter's notebook on the front desk. The receptionist looked confused. "What notebook?" I pointed. It wasn't there. My hands were empty. They searched every personnel database. There was no Black Hollow Ranger Station, no Walter Briggs, no Thomas Avery, no missing rangers, no abandoned research facility, no Channel 13, nothing. According to every official record, I'd spent the previous 3 weeks on approved medical leave after collapsing from exhaustion during training. I had never reported to Montana. I quit the Forest Service the following week. Nobody argued. Nobody asked questions. They simply processed the paperwork, almost as if they were relieved. For months, I convinced myself I'd imagined everything. Stress, isolation, some kind of psychological breakdown. Then, 6 months later, a small package arrived without a return address. Inside was the old brass key Walter had given me. Nothing else. No note, no explanation, just the key. I threw it into a river that same afternoon. Or at least, I thought I did. Because sometimes, late at night, when I unlock my apartment door, the key is already hanging on my keychain. I never remember putting it there. I also never bought another radio. Not for my house. Not for my truck. Not even a handheld emergency unit. Because every now and then, usually just after midnight, I'll hear a burst of static from somewhere nearby. There won't be a radio anywhere in the room, but I'll still hear it, perfectly clearly. Then, a familiar voice quietly asks one simple question. The same question, every single time. Daniel, are you ready to come home?